On this Wednesday night, the U.S. president's wide-ranging tit-for-tat tariffs. The countries getting hit hardest.
Foreign leaders have stolen our jobs.
And why Canada is not on his list, what that might mean. The anxiety among Canadian beef producers.
It's such a small margin, tight margin business.
Plus, we're in a region particularly vulnerable to tariffs. And
girl, we couldn't get much higher.
Yeah! From Jim Morrison to Batman and Iceman.
You can be my wingman anytime.
The extraordinary legacy of one of Hollywood's greatest leading men, Val Kilmer.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. April 2nd was circled on the American president's calendar weeks ago as the day he would tax imports from countries around the world. And today in the Rose Garden of the White House, against a backdrop of American flags, Donald Trump did a rambling, low-tech unveiling of his sweeping import taxes, holding up a chart showing reciprocal tariffs he'll impose on a host of countries. Canada did not appear on his list.
This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike.
Trump claimed other countries, including Canada, have been ripping off the U.S. for years. In fact, Canada has an existing free trade agreement with the U.S. that Trump himself signed during his first term. And it seems Canada has escaped the worst of what Trump announced today. We have reporters here in Canada and in London, England, and the U.S. Capitol bringing us reaction tonight. We begin with Jackson Proskow in Washington. Jackson, it was classic Trump today, lots of rambling and that long list. Canada doesn't appear on it. What should we make of that?
Hi, Donna. Well, here's what we understand tonight. Canada and Mexico were excluded because of the existing fentanyl-related tariffs, and those remain in place, including their broad exemptions for goods that are USMCA compliant. Now, Canada does still face steel and aluminum tariffs and automotive tariffs, but basically, we are tonight where we have been for the last month. Now, the same cannot be said for every other country on the planet. They will be subjected at minimum to a new baseline tariff of 10%. But many countries face targeted reciprocal rates that are much, much higher than that. For example, imports from the EU will now be taxed at 20%. It's 34% for goods from China and 25% for goods from South Korea. Now, the White House claims it actually discounted those tariffs to, it says, half of what it says those nations were charging the U.S. in the form of tariffs and non-monetary barriers and what Trump generally called cheating. Trump is also proceeding with a 25% tariff on all foreign-made cars, something he announced last week. And so to do all this, he's declaring a national economic emergency and showing very little compassion to corporations that might face higher costs.
My answer is very simple. If they complain, if you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America, because there is no tariff if you build your plant, your product in America.
And Jackson, for clarity, compared to other countries Trump targeted today, did Canada escape the worst of it?
It seems so for now, but look, things only last as long as they last in Trump's world, and he could well change his mind at some point in the future. In their briefing note, the White House certainly mentioned the idea that the fentanyl-related tariffs in place now could somehow be lifted or change or fall apart, and they're pointing out that tariffs on non-USMCA compliant goods, those are things not made wholly in Canada. Yeah, those are there for the long term.
Okay, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. No one knew what was coming from the White House today, including Canada's Prime Minister. Mark Carney, who is campaigning as Liberal leader as well as running the country, went back to Ottawa. Tonight, he said Trump's measures will fundamentally change the international trading system, and that will have an impact on Canada.
He has preserved a number of important elements of our relationship, the commercial relationship between Canada and the United States. But the fentanyl tariffs still remain in place, as do the tariffs for steel and aluminum.
Mackenzie Gray is following developments in Ottawa.
How are you responding to Trump?
A stark warning from Mark Carney.
President Trump has just announced a series of measures that are going to fundamentally change the international trading system.
But broad swaths of the Canadian economy were spared as Canada avoided reciprocal tariffs. But even still, the pain will be deep.
In our judgment, it will be negative on the U.S. economy. That will have an impact on us.
A 25% tariff on some autos is still on the books. The details of how that will impact Canada, unclear. And the fentanyl tariffs haven't gone anywhere.
Are you going to speak with Donald Trump?
Carney got off the campaign trail Wednesday for an emergency cabinet and Canada-U.S. Advisory Council meetings, where the Liberals discussed their promised response to the tariffs.
Where we stand right now, it's honestly, it's pretty unclear.
Which won't be announced until Carney meets with the premiers on Thursday.
I think that's a positive sign. But in saying that, let's see what happens. This can change again, hour by hour, day by day.
Justin Trudeau's government put together a $125 billion retaliatory tariff package that the Carney government could turn to. But the Prime Minister has been tight-lipped on if he plans to dust off that strategy that would raise prices for Canadians on things like U.S. food and electronics.
We're going to fight these tariffs with countermeasures. We are going to protect our workers.
And there could be more measures to come. The U.S. has threatened tariffs on Canadian lumber.
The relationship with the United States has changed forever. And that means Canada has to operate in that framework now.
But changing that framework is easier said than done. 77% of Canada's total exports go to the U.S. We share a nearly 9,000-kilometer border. And the Americans have the biggest economy and military in the world, Donna, which will make Canada ending reliance on the U.S. a monumental task.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. Tonight, Alberta's premier called what Trump announced an important win for Canada and Alberta. The federal Conservative leader has not made Trump's tariffs a focus of his campaign. Pierre Poilievre says he does not intend to pivot, though he is promising policies he says will Trump-proof Canada's economy. David Akin is in Kingston, Ontario, where Conservatives are holding a rally. David, is Poilievre's approach to Trump different from Mark Carney's?
Not when it comes to the direct response to Trump's tariffs, Donna. Pierre Poilievre would do just what Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau has said they would do, hit back.
First, our immediate response must be targeted reciprocal tariffs.
Like the Liberals, the Conservatives would provide financial support for workers at risk in a tariff war. And like Carney, Poilievre would seek a new deal with Trump while protecting supply management and official languages. In his own way, Poilievre is trying to be a Team Canada player.
Though I disagree strongly with both Prime Ministers Trudeau and Carney, they occupy that office. And I've been very careful not to do anything to divide Canada's voice.
But where Poilievre differs from his Liberal rival is he is campaigning on a different kind of plan to transform or Trump-proof the Canadian economy. The Conservatives favor a heavy focus on energy and resource development, spurred on by a series of tax cuts with a much-eased regulatory environment. Donna.
David Akin in Kingston, Ontario. Thanks, David. Our senior business correspondent, Anne Gaviola, is with me, and everyone is trying to make sense of this and what it means for Canada. What's been the reaction from the business world?
Well, Donna, the auto industry primarily here is one we need to hear from. They're already dealing with 25% steel and aluminum tariffs, and now we know about additional levies. So first, on vehicles made outside the U.S., with a second stack of tariffs for auto parts coming in May. But the exemption for CUSMA-compliant goods remains, and that limits the impact. We did hear today from Unifor President Lana Payne, and she warns that Trump's tariffs could create a shock to the auto industry's deeply integrated supply chains. And in her words, that could be the linchpin of a continent-wide recession. Now, industry experts say we could see some assembly lines forced to shutter.
I think it's a day of complexity and confusion. Any suggestion that it would be shut down immediately, I think it's a bit of a guess, but it may be informed guess based on individual parts manufacturers' specific circumstances.
Adam says any way you slice it, tariffs will hit American businesses and ultimately consumers. And if the goal of these tariffs is to bring factories to the U.S., then he, like many economists, tell me that finding people to work in them is going to be a big challenge because the U.S. economy is currently running at full employment. Donna.
And Gaviola, thank you. The U.S. president listed a lot of countries he's imposing tariffs on, everywhere from China to India to Vietnam. Canada's prime minister has said that will have an impact on the global economy and trade and on Canada. Redmond Shannon is in London. Redmond, outside of North America, what countries will be hardest hit by Trump's tariffs?
Well, Donna, essentially Trump has applied tariffs that are half of what the US says each country imposes on it, down to a minimum of 10%. Outside of North America, the big exporters to the US are China, being hit with 34%, Japan at 24%, and Germany tariffed at 20%, as are all EU members. But they're not necessarily the most exposed. Per capita, that country might be Ireland. US government data says Ireland exported more than $100 billion of goods to the US last year, much of that in pharmaceuticals, which do appear to be exempt, at least for now. Irish exports are now tariffed at 20%, amount to almost $20,000 US per person last year. Compare that to about $10,000 in Canada and almost $4,000 in Mexico. Other countries that may be feeling the effects are Taiwan, facing 32%, and Vietnam, a small economy but a big exporter of clothing, tariffed at 46%. The European Union, which makes decisions on tariffs for all 27 members, says it will respond to Trump.
European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You know, you think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half.
Meanwhile, perhaps a sigh of relief here in the UK, escaping with just a 10% tariff, Donna.
All right, Redmond, thanks. Before Trump's announcement today, the Conference Board of Canada warned communities in southwest Ontario are particularly at risk from U.S. tariffs. The region is a hub for the auto industry, manufacturing and commercial farming. Jeff Semple is in Guelph tonight, where workers are on edge.
This company in southwestern Ontario produces hydraulics used in everything from garbage trucks to construction equipment. Their products are also used in vehicles, and most are made with steel that comes from the United States.
There's no easy way to pivot immediately to find goods outside of the U.S.
The steel and auto sectors are also being hit by Canada's retaliatory tariffs. The Industry Association is asking the federal government to reconsider its elbows up response.
Two wrongs don't make a right. The retaliatory tariffs just seem like a burden on many Canadian businesses and are going to affect growth and jobs if they continue.
Kitchener and other communities in southwestern Ontario are particularly vulnerable to Trump's tariffs. The major industries here are a combination of auto, advanced manufacturing, and agriculture.
Having a global tariff war could be the stupidest thing that any U.S. president has ever done, and that's saying something.
The local Chamber of Commerce says the region will need government support to survive.
We know that people have already lost jobs. We know there'll be some businesses that won't be able to make it through.
But other businesses are breathing a sigh of relief. Barclay Knapp's farm near Guelph has been in his family for 3 generations. Ontario's agriculture industry employs around 80,000 people, and most of what's grown here is exported to the United States.
Our markets are so interconnected.
Canada's free trade agreement with the U.S. covers agriculture, including produce, which means they're exempt from this latest round of U.S. tariffs, at least for now.
It's what potentially could happen, what will happen. We don't know. It's changing every week, every day.
Knapp and other farmers import their parts and equipment made of steel and aluminum from the United States. So even industries that have been spared the worst of this trade war, Donna, are still feeling the effects.
Okay, Jeff Semple in Guelph, Ontario, thanks. Coming up, how Canadian cattle ranchers are worried Trump's trade war could cause trouble for them. Beef is big business in Canada. More than 340,000 Canadian jobs are tied to the beef industry. That could shrink if President Trump's trade war starts targeting Canada's beef exports. Heather Yourex-West has a reaction from the prairies where livelihoods could be at risk.
Buddy, what are you thinking?
Rancher Evan Hegedus has a lot on his mind. The southern Alberta beef producer is in the midst of calving season with 5,500 head of cattle in his feedlot.
Quite often, guys are trying to make $50 an animal, and if your grain inputs are changed or your end market is changed, that $50 can get pretty skinny to a negative 500 or 1,000 very fast.
Put simply, any tariffs on Canadian beef exports will mean trouble for his operation. and fast. It's why news of Canada's continued exemption is so welcome.
The word I'd use is relieved to some degree. We've been really, passing on the narrative, that the idea that that it's an integrated North American market, and that we're both U.S. and Canadian producers are better off because of it.
Like the auto sector, the North American beef industry is highly integrated. Hundreds of thousands of American-born cows are imported every year to feed at Canadian feedlots before crossing the border again to be processed in the United States.
Just the threat of tariffs is already hampering growth in the sector, bringing back painful memories from the early 2000s when the U.S. shut its doors to Canadian beef imports completely. That time after a single Alberta cow was found to have BSC, or mad cow disease.
I know the devastation that caused, and I can see that this is a potential to cause a similar devastation to this industry.
While that crisis lasted almost 2 years, ranchers can only hope the tariff saga can be quickly resolved. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, near Acme, Alberta.
Supreme victory. One judge's big win in Wisconsin came at the expense of Elon Musk. That's Susan Crawford, winner of Wisconsin's closely watched Supreme Court election. She was backed by the Democrats, and she beat the Trump-endorsed candidate by 10 percentage points. Her victory is seen as a repudiation of Elon Musk, who spent $25 million supporting the losing judge, even handing out checks at one point, making this the most expensive judicial election in American history.
I never could have imagined that I'd be taking on the richest man in the world.
Voters turned out in droves, and Crawford's victory sustains the 4-3 Liberal majority on Wisconsin's Supreme Court. Elon Musk's car company is taking a hit. Sales of Teslas fell 13% in the first quarter of 2025 compared to the first quarter of last year. Analysts say it's likely because of an aging lineup, more EV competition, and the backlash against Musk himself, who is working closely with President Trump and slashing the federal workforce. Tesla shares rose today after a report Musk will soon leave his post in Washington and go back to running his businesses. The White House calls that garbage, and Musk calls it fake news.
It's not left or right, it's right or wrong. It's getting good trouble.
New Jersey Democratic Senator Cory Booker, as he wrapped up a marathon speech last night that was a political protest against Donald Trump. Booker spoke for 25 hours and 5 minutes, breaking the record for the U.S. Senate's longest continuous speech. It wasn't a filibuster because no legislation was being passed. Booker called it a moral call to action and outlined all the things he says Trump has done wrong in the first 3 months in office. Next, how Val Kilmer's extraordinary range helped him become one of Hollywood's most unsung leading men.
You figured it out yet? What's that? Who's the best pilot?
That scene from the 1986 film Top Gun set up one of the great character rivalries. Tom Cruise's Maverick meeting his match, the Iceman, played by Val Kilmer. Kilmer was only 65 years old when he died yesterday. His daughter says the cause of death was pneumonia. Kilmer had also been diagnosed with throat cancer in recent years and had largely stepped back from public life to focus on his health and his family. Eric Sorensen looks back at his life and career.
Val Kilmer was an instant matinee idol who could hold his own in a Tom Cruise blockbuster.
What's your problem, Kazansky? You're everyone's problem. That's because every time you go up in the air, you're unsafe.
But as Batman,
I have a riddle for you.
Val Kilmer's starring roles could also be moodier or more complicated, as the sultry rock icon Jim Morrison.
Girl, we couldn't get much higher. Yeah!
While he began as a Juilliard School phenom with heartthrob good looks, Kilmer was drawn increasingly to characters who were intriguing. The sickly Doc Holliday in Tombstone.
You retired too?
Not me. I'm in my prime. One of his favorites, playing a man of many disguises in The Saint.
You don't put any stock in this cold fusion mumbo jumbo, do you?
I play 15 characters, and
was in many ways just closer to my heart.
Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer.
Kilmer was unpredictable on set and off.
Let that man alone!
He liked Michael Douglas's take on his bad boy image.
He said, really, it's a compliment. They don't write about people they're not interested in.
It was shocking when such a physical actor was struck down with throat cancer in his 50s. He continued to work, even produced a documentary that relied on many of the home movies he shot.
Here we are, filming ourselves.
And he was open about his illness.
5, right, 2, here, the one, at the one, take the 5.
Director Ron Howard is remembering Kilmer's awesome range as an actor. Ben Stiller calls him brilliant and incredibly cool. Josh Brolin, an uber-creative firecracker. There's not a lot left of those. 35 years after Top Gun, a poignant send-off in the sequel.
Who's the better pilot, you or me?
Even in a whisper, Val Kilmer was spellbinding.
That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Here Canada showcases an owl perched on the Canadian flag in Stony Lake, Ontario, the War Memorial in Russell, Manitoba, and carved Canadian flag on Main Island, British Columbia. Keep them coming. Send your pictures of Canadian pride to Global National at globalnews.ca. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.